Great. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. We apologize. This is Kim Beer, Director of Public Policy at the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, and I'm here with my colleague Justin Beland, and we're sorry we're running a little bit late. But welcome to May's Advocacy Update. We're thrilled to provide you with some updates of our recent activities in the last month and some new activity around additional advocacy issues that we are working on behind the scenes here at the Reeve Foundation and with other coalition partners. So for today's agenda, we'll welcome everyone and we'll review April's assignments. We will talk about the Reeve Foundation recently testified in Congress, which was really exciting. Will Reeve, the son of Christopher and Dana Reeve. We'll talk a little bit about the FAA reauthorization, which includes some provisions, disability-related provisions that are really important to our population and community. We are so thrilled to have a regional champion from Washington State, Joseph Preti. We're really thrilled to have him. He's been a really active and passionate regional champion, and he will be on to share his story and provide some tips and advice around developing relationships with your congressional members and senators. We'll go into May assignments, and then, of course, we'll take questions. So in April, again, we are continuing our support for the increase of $1 million for additional funding in the FY19 Labor HHS Education Appropriations Bill. We will, Justin will give you an update on where we are there and talk a little bit about how we were just recently in Congress testifying. And as always, and some of you have been really wonderful with sending me some additional recruits, but please talk to your family and friends and those who are really concerned and want to help us advance our advocacy and policy issues to please recruit an advocate and encourage them to become a regional champion. If you need additional information around how to become a regional champion, I'll be sure to send that in the follow-up notes. We have an additional introductory letter that you may want to share with some of your family and friends, including providers as well. I think we're going to now get started. Justin and I were just in Congress last week with Will Reeve, and Justin will begin our presentation. Justin?
Thanks, Kim, and thanks everybody for being on. I appreciate it. Before we talk about Will Reeve's testimony on the Hill last week, I want to give a quick update on where we are in the appropriations process. I know that we use terms like FY18, FY19, and it all sort of overlaps and blends together, so I just want to make sure that everyone is aware where we are. So remember that the Paralysis Resource Center technically received a $1 million increase in the fiscal year 2018 omnibus bill that passed a couple of years back. We are in the middle of fiscal year 18. It started October 1st last year. It will run through the end of September this year. That is FY18. And because there was disagreement in Congress on the way to get all of that funded, it took a while to finalize it. And so finally, just a couple of months ago, they passed a massive spending package that funded every federal program that exists, really. And in that, the Paralysis Resource Center received a $1 million increase. The total funding for the PRC was increased to $7.7 million. But as you've heard on previous webinars and alerts and things of that nature, only $6.7 million of that was specifically directed to go to a national paralysis resource center, which is to say the one that is operated by the Reeve Foundation. The other $1 million of that will be in all likelihood used for the Administration for Community Living state pilot program, a new program that will do, as far as we can tell, exactly the same work that's being done by the Reeve Foundation's Quality of Life grants. We've talked about this a little bit. This is a funding opportunity announcement that the Administration for Community Living put out, where they said they were essentially trying something new. It has been very vague on what those state pilots would do. They can be as many as 5 of them, funded at $200,000 each. And all of them, the purpose of them is to take that money and re-grant it to smaller organizations that do things like immersive sports or horseback riding or build ramps or anything that improves quality of life, exactly what Reeve Quality of Life grants already do. So we have worked with Congress to try to get answers on the utility of this program, if not outright stop it. But as of now, it looks like it will be going forward. So our goal now is to get another $1 million increase for fiscal year 19, which again starts October 1st of this year. And we want to make sure that 7.7, so that would bring the total funding to 8.7 million, and we want to make sure that 7.7 million of that goes to the national PRC. So that would be an actual $1 million increase, as opposed to the kind of splitting hairs that they did with the omnibus. Now, it was great that we got that $1 million in the omnibus, because if we hadn't, then the national PRC would only be funded at $5.7 million. But because of that $1 million increase, it is funded at a higher level. But we want to make sure that we get a $1 million increase to the PRC that goes to the national PRC. So our goal that we're working on in Congress, both in the House and the Senate, is a total funding of $8.7 million, 7.7 of which would go to a national, would specifically go to a national PRC. We were lucky enough to be selected to give testimony before the House Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education Appropriations Subcommittee. So that is the subcommittee that oversees funding for all federal labor, health, and education programs. It is a huge swath of programs. Several times during the meeting, the ranking member, Rosa DeLauro from Connecticut, and the chairman, Tom Cole of Oklahoma, referred to it as the People's Bill, because it is the bill that most often directly helps the average person, whether it's through labor, health and human services, or education. So being selected to give testimony was a fantastic opportunity. It gave us a chance to talk right to the people that give us our money. And originally it was going to be Alexandra Reeve Givens, Christopher Reeve's daughter, who was going to do the testimony. As some of you know, she actually used to work on Capitol Hill on the Judiciary Committee. But she ended up going into labor and having a baby that very day. So Will Reeve, who some of you obviously know as Christopher Reeve's son, you might know him from ESPN and the MSG Network, and his outstanding work with Team Reeve, pinch hit, so to speak, and he did an absolutely fantastic job. He found out at about 3:30 in the morning he was going to be testifying, and he just hit it out of the park. He was easily the most compelling testimony we saw that day. I strongly recommend that you watch it on the Reeve website. Rather than just read it, I recommend you watch it. It was really, he did a fantastic job. But he ended, I'll quote what he ended his testimony with. He said, "My father once said hope is like a lighthouse, helping individuals lost in the darkness to find their way. But like a lighthouse, hope must be built on solid foundations. The resources, support, and community created by the PRC are the foundation for hope for millions of individuals affected by paralysis across the country. I strongly urge you to support this program." And it really, we got rave reviews from appropriations staff on his testimony. So again, a great opportunity to talk right to the people that do our funding. So we'll talk a little bit about what happens next with that in a minute, but I also want to note that Will, even though he knew his sister was at that very moment having a baby, stayed in D.C. to do some congressional visits with us on the Senate side, which was great. Here you see Senator Elizabeth Warren. That is Bill Cawley, who runs the Reeve Foundation's Peer and Family Support Program. I'm sure most of you know him or have chatted with him. We had a great visit that afternoon, several great visits actually, with the appropriators and people on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. We were told across the board that they were very appreciative of what they were doing. Senator Patty Murray of Washington, Joe Preddy's senator, was especially supportive. We didn't know this, but she has a friend who was spinal cord injured in a motorcycle accident when they were both young. So she knows about our organization, she knows about the Paralysis Resource Center, and was very appreciative of the work we were doing. So it was great to get that validation and great to talk to more appropriators about the importance of the work that we're doing. But like everything else in Washington, there is overall a lot of hurry up and wait. So we had these great visits, we gave testimony, but to be frank, we don't expect there to be much movement in either the House or the Senate on appropriations bills for some time. They are moving through some other spending bills, such as the Department of Defense. Ours, again, which is called the Labor HHS Education Appropriations Bill, is usually one of the last that they will get to. We are submitting testimony on the Senate side. It's unlikely they'll be taking public witnesses to give testimony, but they do accept public testimony, which we will be submitting. That is due on June 1st. And of course, we will be asking for an increase of $1 million to $8.7 million. So thank you if you wrote your senators. There's obviously still time to do that in support of that $8.7 million. We are in a bit of a holding pattern until further notice, but we'll definitely keep you in the loop as things develop. So I'll stop right there. I know that's a lot to cover on appropriations, so I'll stop quickly and ask if there are any questions on anything appropriations related before we move on.
Justin, may I add one thing?
Please.
We mentioned in last month's webinar that the Reeve Foundation was preparing its application to submit for the 3-year grant coming up beginning in June. So I just want to let everyone know that we have submitted our grant. I believe that we have submitted it this week, and we will keep our fingers crossed. We want to continue to thank you for your support and your outreach to your members, and we're hoping for the best. So we're really thrilled that that's finished and that we are creating so much momentum in Congress, and that's really due to your support, your outreach, and your continued letters to the Hill and contacts.
Moving on, we're going to talk about the FAA Reauthorization Act. Now, you may wonder, what does reauthorization of the Federal Aviation Administration have to do with any of the subject matter that we usually discuss? And that is certainly a valid question. But many groups and many members of Congress, including Congressman Jim Langevin, who, as we've mentioned before, is the only member of the House to be in a wheelchair, many members of Congress are looking to put in protections for people with disabilities in this reauthorization. So the Airline Access Act was passed back in 1986 under President Reagan, and does offer some protection to people with disabilities and people with mobility impairments. There is the prevailing thoughts these days is that it did not go far enough, was not able to keep up with changing times and changing needs of people with disabilities. So there have been efforts underway to make changes to the Airline Amendments Act of 1986. A lot of those came in the form of a bill in the House and Senate. We've already chatted about this, called the Airline Access Amendments Act. And we can talk a little bit about what that would do, but many members of Congress wanted to roll some of that into the FAA Reauthorization Act. And just to kind of give a 50,000-foot view, any federal program that you can imagine, whether it's a huge program like the FAA or a smaller program, at some point needs to be authorized. In other words, it needs to be created by Congress. At that point, moving forward, then it needs to be appropriated. It needs to have money given to it. So those are the two things you need for a federal program. You need authorization to create it, and you need appropriations to fund it. Those authorizations, by definition and by statute, run out. There are none of them that are permanent. So you have to go in every once in a while, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and reauthorize the program to make sure that it is still receiving federal funding. Authorization for the Federal Aviation Administration will run out this year. It's not unusual for many federal programs to be authorized and then have that authorization run out and then just keep funding it. No Child Left Behind, that happened to a while ago. NASA was not reauthorized for a long time. But they wanted to get this one done sooner than later, obviously, given that there's been a couple of air accidents lately. They want to make sure that this is reauthorized and that they are getting this done as fast as possible. So the House went to work on this, and they passed their bill, and there is a lot of good stuff in what the House passed. You can read here on your screen some of the information that's in the House-passed bill. Development of an airline passengers with disabilities Bill of Rights was a big one. Requirements for passengers with disabilities to receive timely and effective assistance at the airport or on the aircraft, and that would involve training for airport personnel and airline personnel to ensure that they were treating people right and that they knew how to be better prepared for people with disabilities. So all around, good stuff in that bill. Congressman Langevin was very happy with the way that bill came out of the House. However, there are more facets of it that we would like to see in the Senate-passed version of the bill. So again, this bill passed the House. It now goes to the Senate. They're likely to take it up, probably not this month, but next month, late this month maybe, but definitely in June. They hope to have this done by August. So what we want to do is get a couple of provisions that were in that Senate bill that we've talked about in the past, the Air Carrier Access Amendments Act. Specifically, there are two parts of that bill that we want to see in a final Senate-passed package. One of them would be refer violations of that law to the Department of Justice. Right now, there really isn't a vehicle for you to run any violations of the law up the food chain, so we want stronger enforcement of that law. That's part of it. And we also want to make sure that aircraft themselves meet certain standards, accessibility standards. as determined by the Department of Transportation and other federal entities. We want to make sure that those aircraft are built and equipped to be able to transport people with disabilities safely. So those are two factors that we want to see in that Senate-passed bill. We are putting together an action alert that you will see probably next week for everyone to take action. Again, we are very happy with the way the House bill came out. We just think there can be more in the Senate bill as that goes through, which will hopefully then become part of the final law. So any questions on that? I know it's a bit of a complicated issue, but again, it's all good news. This is not something like you've seen with some previous legislation that we are desperate to try and stop. We think this is a good piece of legislation that could be made a little better, and we look forward to working on that. But any questions or thoughts on that before we move on? Hearing none, again, you will be hearing more about that next week. You will definitely be getting an action alert from us so that you can write your senators in support of the bill and ask them to add in those additional provisions. With that, I am going to turn it over to our guest speaker. We are incredibly appreciative to have Joseph Preddy with us today, one of the regional champions. Here you can see him with his Congresswoman Delbaney of Washington. I know he's also met with staff from Senator Murray's office, so we are, was it Murray or Cantwell? I can't remember.
Both.
Both.
Yeah, I know.
Both staff of both senators.
Everything.
Yeah, so obviously you can see why we would want him on this call, talking about the great work that he's done, and we're hugely appreciative of that work. So with that, I will turn it directly over to Joe. Joe, thank you for being with us. And I know his line is muted, so.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Kim, for asking me to be on this call. In spite of the god-awful early hour it is for me out here on the left. But it's a pleasure to be with you all. I want to talk a little bit about my personal story to begin and how I came to be paralyzed. I suffered a fall on October 2nd of 2010 as a result of being a type 1 diabetic. I had a very severe hypoglycemic or low blood sugar episode and somehow managed to fall inside my home from the 3rd floor down to the 2nd floor, about 12 feet onto a hardwood floor, and as a result was immediately paralyzed and was air-flown to the Regional Trauma Center in Seattle, which is called Harborview Regional Trauma Center. Spent only a couple weeks there, surprisingly, then had to be moved to a skilled nursing facility for rehab because I had fractured my wrist as part of the fall, and also as a result of the surgery, completely lost sight in my left eye, which was creating problems for therapy issues as well. And then spending 2 months in the skilled nursing facility, I then went to the University of Washington Medical Center for inpatient rehab and was there until February 8th. So completely from October 2nd till February 8th, I was either in hospital or a skilled nursing facility. It's just my wife and I. We have 3 children, though. They are all grown. When I fell, I had been fortunate enough to have already been retired. I was able to have been retired at age 55, and we had moved from Southern California to Washington to a lovely place called the Olympic Peninsula. Beautiful home overlooking the straits of the Juan de Fuca. Could see Victoria, Canada at night. It was just idyllic. Bald eagles, deer sleeping in our backyard. And that was a 3-story home. So obviously, even though we tried to make that work by putting in elevators and stair glides, based on the fact of the difficulty that presented, as well as having to still travel into Seattle, which was a couple hours and involved ferries and everything else. So we actually moved to Mill Creek Washington, which is north of Seattle. I have been involved in contacting federal legislators in the past as part of my professional career. I was what was referred to as a congressional awareness coordinator. At the time, I lived in New Mexico, so I dealt with Senators Pete Domenici, Jeff Bingaman, Congressman Bill Richardson. So to be totally upfront and honest, I did have experience in this area of meeting with staff members. I was able to meet with both Senators Bingaman and Domenici in D.C. when I would be back there, like on personal vacation and whatever. And actually, Senator Domenici actually arranged for a tour of the White House for me, which was very nice. So this background, this whole regional champion and advocacy was nothing new to me. I had some previous experience with it. So I reached out and became good friends with Kim, and Kim was incredibly supportive, incredibly knowledgeable, and helped me navigate. And as a result of Kim's assistance and reaching out to the two senators that I have contact with, Senator Maria Cantwell and Senator Patty Murray that Justin mentioned, as well as Congresswoman Representative Susan Delbene. And it just so happened that the timing was good, and I was actually able to arrange a visit with Congressman Delbene, and that's her in that picture there with me at her office after our meeting. And we spoke about, obviously, the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, the PRC, the funding issues, the important work we did, the quality of life grants, all the materials that Kim provided to me, and shared all of that information with the representative. And she also has someone, a friend, whose child was not injured but could relate to my injury because the child of the friend had type 1 diabetes. And, you know, life is a little bit difficult, especially for a child with type 1 diabetes, because there can be a lot of fluctuations in their blood sugar levels. So I was able to connect on that level. And I think the thing I want to convey to everyone is that it's great to go in there with a lot of information. You've got to be able to substantiate, validate why you're there, why it's important to you, but also to have them, at least this is my personal belief, to see you as a person, as a constituent who deals daily with the issues that you're bringing in front of the prospective congressperson and senator. So, again, very fortunate. The timing was right. Representative Delbene was out on recess. We were able to get the meeting with her and several of her staff who deal with community affairs, liaison, et cetera, et cetera. And then, excuse me, then also with Senators Cantwell and Murray, although I wasn't able to meet with them directly, that's something that I'm still pursuing in the future, for future visits when they are back home in the district. And I was able to meet with their regional directors, if you will, a gentleman named Joe Downs from Senator Cantwell's office, and Ann Seabot from Senator Murray's office. Both younger people, very receptive, again, presented the materials that Kim provided me regarding our funding request, regarding information about the PRC and the invaluable work it does and how it impacted me personally. And I guess I want to share that briefly with you also. Pauline and I, my wife, we went from being at the University of Washington Medical Center, where we had physical therapists, occupational therapists, recreational therapists, nurses, doctors, social workers, to moving back home to Port Angeles, Washington, in the middle of nowhere, and it was just the two of us. And hope was lost for me. The first 2 years of my injury, I wanted to be dead, and that might be a little too much information. That's very personal, but that's also part of my story, and that's also part of my story that I share with the members of Congress and their staff members that I visit with, because that's my truth. And again, it shows them that I'm not there just as some representative of the PRC and Chris and Dana Reeve Foundation, but I'm a person who lives with this daily and share the struggles that entails. So it was very much a situation that I feel is important to share with the members of the Congress members you meet with. As I say, Joe Downs with Senator Cantwell, a young lady named Ann Seabot with Senator Murray, and in addition to presenting that information, having them get to know me, one of the most important things was to let them know that my intention was to have an ongoing relationship. This was not a one and done. This was get used to me, remember how I look, what I look like, because when other issues surface that I need to share with you, I intend to pick up the phone, reach out to you, and arrange a visit, because that's very important to let them know that this is an ongoing issue. The rights of the disabled community are important, and they're important not just on a wide spectrum, but on an individual basis. And also along those lines, I also am involved with several other organizations that advocate for the disabled. I serve on the board of the Seattle Alliance for People with Disabilities. There's a local program out here also called the Here and Now Project, which is a peer support group for the disabled. So this is something that's important to me. I've always been a believer in, even though it might sound trite and corny, of making a difference, of leaving the world a better place. And I get a tremendous sense of satisfaction and purpose from doing this kind of work. So I'm really honored to have this opportunity. I find it rewarding. I find it fun. And it can really be something that enriches you as a person. So that's really about all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. That was excellent. I really, really appreciate it. And I should add, I meant to put a picture of this up, but this visit that Joe had with Representative Delbany had an immediate impact. At the time we were circulating a letter to get that additional $1 million of support for the PRC. And luckily, right after this meeting, Representative Delbany signed on to that letter. We had 14 signatures, and hers was one, directly because Joe brought her that information. And you can't replicate that. It's unbelievable. Just to be able to have that kind of hands-on stuff. And that's Joe talked about telling his story, and that is by far the most important thing that I think any advocate can do. We can supply you with talking points and all sorts of things like that, but it's your story that makes the difference. You are the ones that are living this and have been through it and can make that difference. And I just can't tell you how much, Joe, we appreciate that work. And for anyone else listening, we are happy to, or whether you're watching this now or on the recording, we're happy to help arrange those meetings and connect you to your legislators, whether it's here in D.C. or in your district. We can let you know when those district work periods are, when they'll be back in their home states and home districts. We can get you the scheduler information. We can connect all those dots to make sure that you can have those meetings. We are happy to help you do that and encourage you to do that. And finally, as Joe said, it is an ongoing relationship. You don't go and just meet with them once and then that's it. It starts this path where they're going to know who you are and they're going to know what you want, and then they'll see the benefits of the work that the Reeve Foundation does, and it's hugely helpful. So I just can't thank you enough, Joe. Kim, I don't know if you had anything.
No, I just want to say thank you, Joe, and really encourage everyone to consider contacting their members, and we're happy to help. It really makes a difference. Justin and I often hear from members that it's really nice that we come in, but they really want to hear from their constituents, and they especially want to hear from people living with a spinal cord injury and paralysis.
Absolutely.
We're really grateful.
Thank you, guys, and thank you. I forgot to mention how proud I was of having Representative Del Bene agree to sign on to that letter. It was very meaningful, so thank you.
It was great. It was really, really helpful. I mean, like I said, we got 14 signatures on that letter, and that was one. So huge, huge help. Moving on to May assignments. So again, you will hear from us likely next week in terms of an action alert that we're going to put out on the FAA reauthorization bill. We're just trying to make sure that we've got our language correct and that we want to ask for, and finding out who the champions are, who the kind of the backroom stuff that's going to go on with that. But you will hear from us next week in terms of support for that. And again, please do. If you have anybody in mind that you would like to recruit as a regional champion, there is strength in numbers. The more folks we can get like Joe, the better we will be. So if you know anybody that wants to join, please send them our way, send them information. Anything we can do to help recruit more people, please do let us know. And that is the official end of the program, but happy to entertain questions or comments or anything else from anyone still on.
Justin, this is Joe again. I have one quick question.
Sure.
With regard to the May assignments and writing the senators, is it appropriate, for example, for me to reach out to like Ann and Joe in my contacts,
yes,
and Kelly at Representative Del Bene's and speak to them over the phone, or like I'm going to try to get out to see Kelly at Del Bene's office to speak to her in person about that?
Okay, absolutely yes is the short answer. The bill has already passed the House, though, so your contacts with Cantwell and Murray are probably more relevant to this because it's already out of the House. So certainly if you're meeting with Del Bene's office, say thank you for getting it done because, again, there's a lot of good stuff in there. But it's going to the Senate now, so that's where we're going to focus on. But if you can get those meetings and talk about what we want in that bill, we will definitely get you some talking points for those meetings.
Okay, great. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? And again, of course, if you are watching this, a recording of this, by all means reach out to Kim or I, and we will happy to answer any questions that come out of that as well. Hearing none, I think we can wrap it up. Thank you so much again, Joe, for being on and telling your story. Thanks to everyone else who was able to join us, and thanks to everyone watching the recording. And we will see you next month.
Thank you.
And that does conclude today's conference. Thank you for your participation. You may now disconnect.
Thank you.